72% of Americans who retire at 65 will run out of money before they die. Not run low, not get tight, run out completely. I want you to sit with that number for a moment, because it is not a projection from some think tank trying to sell you a financial product. It is a pattern. A repeating, brutal, merciless pattern that plays out in nursing homes and downsized apartments and adult children's guest bedrooms all across this country every single year. And what makes it truly devastating is not just the financial collapse. It is the silence around it, the way nobody warned these people, the way the entire system that was supposed to protect them, the advisors, the retirement accounts, the conventional wisdom, the carefully laminated plan, quietly failed them while they were busy trusting it. I am 72 years old. I stopped saving money at 68. And in the 4 years since, I have built more real, lasting, income-generating wealth than I did in the 20 years prior when I was doing everything right. I am not here to sell you anything. I do not have a course, a newsletter, or a coaching program with my name on it. What I have is a story, a true one, and I'm going to tell it to you exactly as it happened, with no sugarcoating, no comfortable omissions, and no well-meaning lies. Because I spent too many decades of my life being misled by comfortable people, and I refuse to become one of them. I want to take you back because the beginning matters. Not in the way beginnings always matter in motivational stories, where humble origins set up a triumphant rise. I want to take you back because what I did in my 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s looks, on the surface, exactly like success. And that is the trap. Nobody warned you about it. The danger is not laziness. The danger is not recklessness. The danger is obedience. I was an extraordinarily obedient person. I did everything they told me to do. Go to school, get the degree, find a stable company, work hard, stay loyal, keep your head down, climb slowly, and trust the process. And I did. I studied accounting, graduated with honors, and walked directly into a job at a mid-sized manufacturing firm. I wore the same type of suit for 30 years. I sat in the same kind of conference room for 30 years. I gave the best hours of every single day to people who would have replaced me without hesitation the moment it became financially convenient to do so. What I did not fully understand, what nobody sat me down and explained in plain language, is what I was actually trading those hours away for. I thought I was trading them for security, for a future, for the life I would eventually get to live once I had accumulated enough of the right numbers in the right accounts. I had a 401k that I maxed out every single year from age 28 forward. I had a diversified portfolio. I had a financial advisor named Gerald who sent me quarterly statements with charts that always seemed to go up and to the right, and who took me to lunch once a year where we talked about staying the course and not reacting emotionally to market volatility. I trusted Gerald completely. He seemed calm and certain, and at the time I confused calm certainty with actual knowledge. That was one of my more expensive mistakes. I also delayed the things I told myself I would do eventually. The trip to Portugal my wife Elena had wanted to take since 1987. The kitchen renovation we discussed for a decade. The fishing cabin up north I had fantasized about since my own father took me to one when I was 9. I said not yet to all of those things. I said when we retire, when we have more time, when the market does what we need it to do. I said it so many times it stopped feeling like a delay and started feeling like a plan. That distinction between a delay and a plan is one I would spend years learning to undo. The thing about the traditional retirement narrative is that it is built on a moment, a singular, clean, celebratory moment of arrival. You work hard, you sacrifice, and then one day you cross the finish line and the life you postponed begins. I believed in that moment with everything I had. I worked toward it the way a religious person works toward heaven, not because I could picture it clearly, but because the entire structure of the life I was living required it to be real. I retired at 64, on a Tuesday. There was no party because I had asked for no party. There was a brief acknowledgement at the weekly team meeting, a gift card to a steakhouse, and a handshake from a regional vice president who had been with the company 3 years and did not actually know who I was. I drove home, sat down at the kitchen table while Elena made coffee, and I waited. I waited for the feeling of arrival to show up, the sensation of finally being on the other side of the great sacrifice. I waited for approximately 4 days before I understood, in my stomach before I understood it in my mind, that there was no other side. There was just this. Tuesday, coffee, silence, and a number in an account that was supposed to last me for the rest of my natural life. We ran the numbers again in the first month. Gerald came over. First time he had been to the house in 30 years, which should have told me something. And we spread everything out on the dining room table. The 4% rule. Take 4% of your portfolio annually, and statistically your money should last 30 years. We had done well. On paper we were fine. Gerald shook our hands, drove away in his car that was considerably more expensive than mine, and Elena and I looked at each other across the table. She got diagnosed 14 months later. Nothing catastrophic, I want to be clear, because Elena is here with me today and she is well. But it was serious enough to require surgery, followed by a medication regimen, followed by physical therapy, followed by monitoring appointments that required us to be in the city twice a month. And the bills arrived. Not all at once. That would almost have been easier. They arrived in waves, the way water comes into a sinking ship, not through a single catastrophic breach, but through 1,000 small ones. Co-pays, medications not fully covered, a specialist who was out of network because the in-network specialist had a 6-month waiting list, transportation costs, small hotel stays when appointments ran late, and then, quietly, almost insultingly, inflation. Groceries, utilities, the insurance premiums themselves increasing by amounts that bore no relationship to any cost of living adjustment my Social Security was making. I sat down one evening in March, about 18 months into retirement, with a yellow legal pad and a pen, and wrote out what we had actually spent versus what the plan had projected. I am an accountant by training. Numbers do not frighten me, but these numbers did something specific to me. They did not frighten me. They humiliated me, because I saw, written in my own handwriting, that we had spent in 18 months what Gerald's model had suggested would take 3 years, and we had not been extravagant. We had not taken the Portugal trip. We had continued to live the same modest, careful, deferring life we had always lived, except now the salary was gone, and the expenses had quietly expanded to fill the space it left behind. That night, after Elena was asleep, I sat in the dark in my kitchen, and I got genuinely, foundationally scared. Not panicked. I am not a man who panics. But I felt the specific cold fear of someone who realizes that the structure they have been standing on is not as solid as it appeared. And here is what I want to say about that fear. It was the most useful thing that happened to me in the last decade. It broke something loose in me that had been locked since the day I accepted my first paycheck, and organized my life around the quiet promise that someone else's system would protect me if I followed its rules. The fear told me, in the clearest possible language, that no system protects you, that no rule guarantees your security, that the entire architecture of conventional financial planning is built on assumptions about a world that no longer fully exists, assumptions about inflation rates, about healthcare costs, about life expectancy, about market returns. And when those assumptions fail, the person who pays the price is you, and no one else. I started reading differently after that night. Not the financial press, which I had read loyally for decades, and which was written largely for people still accumulating. I started reading about how wealth actually behaves, how the quietly, durably wealthy, not the flashy ones, not the television rich, actually thought about money and time and value. And I kept finding the same pattern over and over. They never stopped producing. They never accepted the idea that there was a finish line after which they would transition from creators of value to consumers of stored value. They understood that stored value is always, slowly, being consumed by the world, by inflation, by healthcare, by time itself. And the only meaningful defense against that consumption is continued production. What I had after 40 years of professional life was something genuinely rare and valuable. Deep, specific, hard-won expertise in financial operations for mid-sized manufacturing companies. A network of relationships built over decades with people who trusted me because I had earned that trust honestly. The perspective that only comes from watching cycles repeat themselves, from seeing the same mistakes made by the same types of people for the same reasons, generation after generation. I had, in other words, an asset, a significant one, and I had spent 14 months sitting in my kitchen, treating it as though it had expired. I will not pretend the transition was simple. The first thing I had to overcome was the internal resistance, the belief that accepting money for my knowledge at 65 was an admission of failure, that a man who had planned correctly should not need to work. I had to dismantle that belief with my bare hands. It took Elena, who has always had more clarity about my psychology than I have, looking at me across the kitchen table and saying, very quietly, "You are not embarrassed because you failed. You are embarrassed because you succeeded, and it was not enough. Those are different things, and only one of them is worth fixing." I began consulting, not through a firm, not through a platform, through 3 phone calls to people who already knew me and respected what I knew. I told them directly that I was available, that I had time, and that I was not interested in pretending I was 20 years younger. I was interested in solving specific problems efficiently using 40 years of accumulated judgment. The first engagement paid me more per hour than I had made at any point in my corporate career. Not because the work was harder, because the value of specific expertise offered without bureaucracy or organizational dilution is actually higher than the same expertise trapped inside a corporate structure. I also eliminated every expense that was purchasing status rather than satisfaction. Not frugality for its own sake. I have no interest in austerity. I mean the precise surgical identification of every dollar going toward the maintenance of an identity I had outgrown. The car lease keeping me in a vehicle that signaled respectability to colleagues I no longer had. The club membership I had kept active for 20 years because letting it lapse would feel like admitting I was no longer in a certain category of person. The subscriptions and services that had accumulated into a permanent, invisible monthly drain on resources that could have been working for me. When I finished that audit, the number was more than I expected, and redirecting it into income-generating assets and my growing consulting practice began to compound in ways that straightforward savings never had. Let me be precise about what I mean when I say I stopped saving and started getting richer, because I do not want you to misunderstand and go empty your accounts. I did not stop having reserves. What I stopped doing is treating the accumulation of static stored money as my primary financial goal. Because here is what nobody tells you about saving after 60. Every dollar you save is slowly, certainly being outpaced by inflation, by the escalating cost of healthcare, by the sheer length of time you may now be expected to live, because the actuarial tables have moved in a direction the 4% rule was never designed to accommodate. People are living into their 80s, 90s, 100s. A pool of saved money is not designed to sustain a person for 40 years of post-retirement life. It was designed to supplement a few years of managed decline. That was the original design, and most people are still using it for something it was never built to do. What I did instead was build. I built a small, efficient, high-value consulting practice running on less than 10 hours per week of my actual time. I built one rental property, not a portfolio, not an empire, one carefully chosen property that generates consistent monthly income regardless of what the market does. I built a digital course on manufacturing financial operations that I created once and that continues to sell. I invested directly in 2 early-stage companies founded by people I had known for decades and trusted completely. None of this required a dramatic personality change. I applied the same qualities that made me effective in corporate life: precision, patience, the willingness to do unglamorous work without complaint, and directed them toward enterprises I controlled. And I want to talk about time, because this is the part people do not fully confront until something forces them to. The time you spend deferring life is not stored somewhere safe and returned to you at retirement. It is spent permanently. The year I did not take Elena to Portugal because we were saving for the future, that year is gone. What I know now that I did not know with enough urgency then is that the deferral of life is its own form of poverty, one that never shows up on any financial statement, one that Gerald never mentioned once in 30 years of quarterly reviews. I am not saying do not be responsible. I am saying that responsibility has been weaponized by a culture and a financial services industry that profits from your patience, your delay, and your quiet acceptance of a smaller present in exchange for a promised future it cannot actually guarantee. We finally took the Portugal trip 2 years ago. It was extraordinary, but I walked differently than I would have walked at 45, and I know it. And Elena knows it, and we do not say it aloud. I am telling you all of this because I see people doing exactly what I did. Intelligent, capable, experienced people in their 50s and 60s, quietly making themselves smaller in deference to a retirement that is supposed to justify the smallness. And I want to say to those people what nobody said to me clearly enough. The life you are postponing is the only life you are going to get. So here is what I want you to do right now, not next quarter, not when the market looks better. Take a piece of paper and write down 3 things. The first is what you actually know, not your job title, not your resume, but what you genuinely, deeply, specifically know in the kind of detail that took decades to accumulate and that someone younger cannot purchase or shortcut their way into. The second is who already trusts you. Not followers, not connections, but real human beings who have watched you operate over time and know from experience that your word means something. The third is what you have been deferring. The specific thing, the named thing, the thing you have told yourself you will get to when the time is right. Because here is the truth that took me 68 years to fully inhabit. The circumstances are never going to align. The time is never going to be perfectly right. The number is never going to feel completely safe. These are not external conditions waiting to be met. They are internal conditions you create by deciding to begin. And beginning at any age, but especially at an age when you have the experience, the relationships, and the perspective that only time can provide, is not a risk. It is the only rational response to the situation you are actually in. I am 72 years old. I am healthier than I was at 65, because I am engaged, because I am building, because I wake up in the morning with a reason that is not simply the absence of an alarm clock. I am generating more income than I did in the final decade of my corporate career, with a fraction of the hours and none of the indignity. I am building a modest fishing cabin on a lake in northern Michigan, and I am doing a portion of the work myself, not because I have to, but because I am 72 years old and I am not done yet, and every nail I drive into that frame is a small, personal, unambiguous statement to that effect. Stop waiting. Stop making yourself smaller in honor of a finish line that does not exist. Stop trusting a system designed for a version of retirement that no longer matches the length or the cost of the life you are actually going to live. You have more to offer the world right now, today, than any savings account will ever express. The question is not whether you have enough saved. The question is whether you are willing to stop living as though your most valuable years are behind you. Because I promise you, from the particular vantage point of someone who has been on both sides of that belief, they are not even close.